And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. On this week's episode, Clifford Brown, his life and times and best albums. And now it's time for more album news. Dr. Pascal Thiam is an award-winning jazz composer, guitarist and vocalist, and he's just released an iconic album called I Can Tell. Pascal Thiam's a leading bebop musician. He's performed alongside Dizzy Gillespie, Donald Byrd and more. His album I Can Tell was released on Friday. It's available for purchase on www.pascalbocca.com. The album is themed alongside a unique blend of music he calls Afro Bluegrass, a style combining Afro-funk, bluegrass and jazz, creating a completely new, innovative sound. The album also features influences from his native Senegalese and Malian roots, as reflected in the instrumentals native to the culture like the fiddle, the balafon, that's a type of percussion instrument, and the banjo. Contains tracks like I Can Tell, Let It Groove All Night Long, Every Time I See You There, Your Smile Inside My Nights, and more. For more information, please visit www.pascalbocca.com. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about more of Clifford Brown's best albums of all time. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. On this week's episode, it's about trumpeter Clifford Brown, his life and times and best albums. On this hour, we're going to be talking about more of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up on this hour. The first album's called Sarah Vaughan with Clifford Brown. This one's a 1954 album release featuring an iconic collaboration between Grammy Award-winning vocalist Sarah Vaughan alongside Clifford Brown on trumpet. It was a critically acclaimed album. The album was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1999. The next album is called The Beginning and the End, recorded in 1973. This album compiled some great solo performances by Clifford. New Faces, New Sounds, a 1953 collaboration between Lou Donaldson and Clifford Brown, a great hard bop album. And Memorial, recorded in 1956. This one's a compilation of some of Clifford's earliest recordings. It was released posthumously in 1956 in memory of Clifford Brown shortly after his death. So that was a quick recap of some of the albums we are going to be discussing on this hour, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. Stay tuned. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. On this week's episode, Clifford Brown, his life and times and best hits. And on this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. The first album is called Sarah Vaughan with Clifford Brown. This one's a 1954 album release featuring an iconic collaboration between Grammy Award-winning vocalist Sarah Vaughan alongside Clifford Brown on trumpet, a critically acclaimed album. Sarah Vaughan has said it was one of her favorite collaborations. The album was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1999. Sarah Vaughan was one of the best jazz singers of her time, and Clifford's trumpet playing is exceptional in the bop genre. His playing is soft and gentle, complementing Sarah's husky, passionate vocals. His playing was especially great for slow, melancholy tunes like the ones in this album. Classics like Lullaby of Birdland, I'm Glad There Is You, April in Paris, and more. The album opens with Lullaby of Birdland. One highlight of this track is Vaughan's improvisation or scat singing. April in Paris, another elegant track. He's My Guy, interpreted by Vaughan in a very saucy, upbeat manner. Probably the best track on the setlist is Jim, a relatively lesser heard of track at the time of the recording, but Vaughan's passionate delivery complemented by Brown's trumpet solos makes it one of the standout tracks on the album. So overall, this album is a great album from the vocal jazz genre. The next album is called The Beginning and the End, recorded in 1973. This one's a compilation of some of the best Clifford tracks out there. The album opens with two tracks that he recorded alongside Chris Powell in 1952 and ends with a series of performances in Philadelphia in 1956. The album compiles some great solo performances by Clifford into one. Tracks like Walking, A Night in Tunisia, Donna Lee, and more. The next album is called The Beginning and the End, recorded in 1973. This one's a compilation of some of the best Clifford Brown tracks. The album opens with two tracks that he recorded alongside Chris Powell in 1952 and ends with a series of performances in Philadelphia in 1956. The album features some great solo performances by Clifford. Tracks like Walking, A Night in Tunisia, Donna Lee, and more. Walking is performed with a local sextet, including one member of Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers band. His rendition of Donna Lee is exceptionally good, a memorable compilation of tracks. New Faces and New Sounds is a 1953 collaboration between Lou Donaldson and Clifford Brown in a quartet format. There's also pianist Elmo Hope, drummer Philly Joe Jones, and bassist Percy Hart on instrumentals. A great hard bop album. And an album called Memorial, recorded in 1956. This one's a compilation of some of Clifford's earliest recordings. It was released in 1956 in memory of Clifford Brown shortly after his death. One half of the album contains tracks from the Clifford Brown Sextet from 1953. This album features Brown on trumpet, Gigi Grice on alto sax and flute, and Charlie Rouse on tenor sax, the rhythm section, John Lewis on piano, Percy Hart on bass, and Art Blakey on drums. One of the standout tracks from that performance is a flute melody called Easy Living by Grice. Elmer Hope's piano playing is another standout feature. The other half of the album covers tracks from the Lou Donaldson Clifford Brown Quintet. The music is great, contains a setlist of original compositions by Brown, there's a few classics, and a selection of tunes by the rest of the band. On all the tracks, the versatility and skill of the band members shines through. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. On this week's episode, Clifford Brown, his life and times and best albums. We've come to an end of today's episode of the Jazz Update, so now let's recap what we were discussing on today's show. So Clifford Brown was one of the leading trumpeters in jazz and influenced several others like Donald Byrd, Booker Little, Lee Morgan and others. He was also an avid composer. Two of his compositions, Joy Spring and Dahoud, have become jazz standards today. During his career, he toured and performed alongside legends like Dizzy Gillespie, Miles Davis and Max Roach. In 1972, he was inducted into the Downbeat Jazz Hall of Fame. According to critics, he was one of the greatest jazz trumpet players of his time. So now let's talk about some of his best albums of all time. The first one's called Sarah Vaughan with Clifford Brown. This one was released in 1955. This album was a collaboration between Brown and legendary vocalist Sarah Vaughan. The album was later inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1999. This album features Sarah Vaughan's powerful vocals backed by Clifford's lilting trumpet melodies and was a massive success. The next album is called Verve Jazz Masters 44. This one's an album compilation of some of Clifford Brown's best hits. In this album, there's performances by him alongside several groups, featuring Clifford Brown classics like Jordu, Gertrude's Bounce, and Stardust. And the definitive Clifford Brown, this album was instrumental in the development of bebop at the time. There's notable tracks that Brown recorded alongside Max Roach in this album, also vocals by Helen, Merrill, Dinah Washington, and Sarah Vaughan. So that was a quick recap of everything that we discussed on today's episode of the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. And on that note, we've come to an end of today's episode of the Jazz Update. I'll see you again next week. Have a great week ahead.